If you're ready to learn to put your needs first, watch today's video where I go through 6 tips to help you prioritize your own needs. Hey guys, if you're new around here, my name is Diana Garcia. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, owner of a private practice called Nurturing Minds Counseling. You know you're a people pleaser, but you're not sure if it's worth it to change this behavior or the behaviors that are associated with people pleasing, and I encourage you to go watch this video where I go through 3 ways why being too nice is backfiring on you. Okay, tip number 1, boundaries will become your new best friend. So you might have heard of boundaries because I feel like boundaries is a buzzword now, but pretty much simple definitions, boundaries is just what's okay and what's not okay in regards to your relationships with other people, or even like in terms of your relationship with work, right? Really thinking about what do you need to put in place in order to make sure that you're okay and keeping yourself safe. So when we're thinking about boundaries, we can think about boundaries with romantic partners, with friends, with family, with peers, with bosses. And so you just really need to think of what do you need to put in place to be okay. So if we think of work, a boundary is, after I'm gone for the day at 5:30, I will not respond to emails, right? Especially if I'm not on call or if that's not part of my job description. So that's just simply you being very clear on what's okay and what's not okay in order for you to make sure your needs are being met. When you come home, you're not overwhelmed because you're stressed out about work. You made a boundary very clear. When we're thinking about boundaries and how to set boundaries, I'd encourage you to check out this book where I did a book review, Set Boundaries, Find Peace. And that really goes through, it's like a concrete primer on how to set boundaries. It goes through pretty much everything about boundaries. But really just even thinking about, can you start small? What are the areas in your life with other people where maybe it's not that hard to set a boundary and you can slowly start building momentum? And really important to really think about when you're setting a boundary, what are you going to do to ensure that that boundary is maintained as much as possible? Obviously, you can't control what someone else does, but for instance, if you're trying to set a boundary, let's say with a family member who tends to criticize you, boundary you can set, it's like, when I hear criticism or when I hear blame or whatever the case is, I'm going to change the subject. I'm going to tell you that I don't want to engage in that. If that continues to happen, I'm going to end this conversation and we can try another day. So you need to be clear when setting a boundary. What are the things that you are willing to do in order to make sure as much as possible that you are going to hold up your part of the bargain when it comes to boundaries? It's not about setting an ultimatum per se or trying to punish someone, because that's not the point. The point is really to make sure that you're okay and that you can deliver a boundary in an assertive way without being aggressive or cruel. In the comments if you've tried to set boundaries with someone and it worked, or if it didn't work, let me know what happened. All right, so the second tip, it's more so remembering that your needs are just as valid as someone else's. And so the reason I say this is because a common thought pattern that I find with people who identify as people pleasers is that they tend to believe that other people's needs trump their own needs, that for some reason other people's needs are more important than their own. And so it's getting really clear that your needs are just as valid as everyone else's in your life. Now, I'm going to make a caveat with here. Clearly, if you're in charge of either minors or children or someone who's disabled can't take care of their needs, clearly it's recognizing that making sure they're safe and their needs are taken care of. But I actually find it's really the extreme opposite with people who struggle with people pleasing, is that they tend to exclusively focus on everyone else's needs to the extent where they ignore their own needs. And it's really starting to recognize that it will get to the point where you can't pour from an empty vessel. Meaning, like, if you keep giving and never prioritizing your needs or replenishing your needs, you're going to get to the point where you're not going to have more to give. You're just going to burn out. And so it's kind of really acknowledging and recognizing if this thought is something that you struggle with and it's something that shows up, it's okay that the thought's there, but it's more so acknowledging that you don't have to listen to it. That one, it's not true, but even if it's not true, I don't really worry so much about whether it's true. It's more so that it doesn't have to call the shots. It doesn't have to dictate your behavior. So that's the tip. It's really acknowledging when this thought shows up and how it influences your behaviors. Okay, the next tip is really noticing and naming what are the patterns that influence you to engage in these behaviors associated with being too nice. So really thinking about what are the common thoughts that show up that tend to influence you being too nice, whether that's, again, other people's needs are more important, or you're responsible for other people's needs, or you have to always be kind, or which isn't bad, but it's, again, if it's to an extreme. It can be you can't handle the discomfort of setting a boundary or a limit, or you just can't say no, you never learned. So really noticing what are those common thoughts that really influence how you act. Same thing, also noticing what about your feelings? What feelings tend to show up that either prevent you from moving forward when setting a limit, or really when they show up, it just feels so overwhelming that you struggle to do anything else. So really common feelings that are associated with this, it's really a lot of anxiety of like, being able to handle the social discomfort or the fear that something's going to go wrong. And I also really think there's a bit of shame that shows up. So shame, that uncomfortable feeling of being unworthy of love or belonging, not being good enough. I think that's the core a little bit here, sometimes driving a lot of these behaviors, really not feeling good enough at times. So then you end up doing these people-pleasing behaviors because it's important for you to be liked, or it's just really hard for you to feel stable if other people are upset at you. And of course, none of us like having other people upset at us, but again, to the point where it feels so physically uncomfortable. So noticing and naming what are those feelings that start to show up. And also noticing, even in that experience, are there any physical sensations in those moments that show up that really make it hard for you to move through them? So noticing and naming them. So really, this tip is all about really starting to understand what drives these people-pleasing behaviors so that you can start to get a better handle on them. So the next tip is really acknowledging. So now you understand what are driving your behaviors, right? What are the thoughts? What are the feelings? And then it's really identifying, what does change look like? So what are the behaviors that are going to start looking like you putting your needs first? So again, is that starting to say no? With who? In what instances? Is it cutting back on things in your life where you just don't have the time or energy, meaning letting go of that extra committee at work, or not being the school mom this year or this semester, letting that go? Is it really asking for help, right? Asking your mom to really pick up your kids 2 days a week, right? So this other piece, it's really acknowledging what are the behaviors that looks like putting yourself first. So in order to stop being so nice, it's like, what does that actually look like day in and day out? And if you're not sure, think about someone in your life who you admire that, man, they're just like so good at being assertive, at putting their needs first. What do they do? What do you see that you wish that you could do, that you wish like, man, I'd, be so psyched if I could do that. So think about those behaviors and then start small and changing some of those behaviors, right? Again, I always talk about small little steps are important. You don't have to shoot for these big grand changes all at once. Just start with those small things. And over time, it's going to be part of your behavior and it's going to start to feel a little bit easier. So I want you to think about, comment below, what are those behaviors that you need to do day in and day out? If I was a fly on the wall, what would I be seeing once you start putting your needs first and stop being so nice? Let me know. Okay, next tip, I'm going to be real with you. You have to expect that you're going to be uncomfortable as you're making these changes. So I think sometimes there's this misperception that change is easy. It isn't. At least it isn't for me. It isn't for the people that I work with. Doesn't mean you can't do it or it's not doable, but it's really starting to expect that change, especially this change of changing some of these ingrained patterns, will feel a little bit uncomfortable. It's kind of like you're really stretching outside of your comfort zone. And so that stretching feels a little bit uncomfortable and you might feel a little bit sore, right? And so really acknowledging and expecting that, I think, is really key. So you don't expect that, you're going to set a limit and then like it's all gravy. Like you might set a limit and then really feel like this sense of guilt and like, oh my God, I don't know if I did the right thing. That's normal and part of the process. So it doesn't spook you or scare you that you did the wrong thing or that you backpedal. So I want you to be really clear in expecting that. And this other piece though, it's really tying these changes to your values. Why are you even doing the heavy lifting, right? Why is it important to you? And I usually find that when I'm clear on my values on something, it really helps propel me forward, right? So example, even doing some of these videos feel really uncomfortable for me at time, but there's a value of authenticity and growth for me. And so I just have to manage these uncomfortable feelings that show up. And so if you're clear on these values when you're making these changes, it'll be a lot easier. I oftentimes hear this value of self-care, that's really important, that putting your needs first is something that you want to value and not just like value it, theoretically, but actually show up and model that for the people in your life. So that's going to be really key through this process, is getting clear on what those values look like for you. Okay, my last tip is practicing some self-compassion. So I'd encourage you to go watch this video that I reviewed Dr. Kristen Neff's book on self-compassion. She's the prime researcher, or one of the main researchers on self-compassion. So I go through more of that. But really quickly, self-compassion, 3 components. Self-kindness, how do you talk to yourself in those moments of difficulties? Second part, it's mindfulness. Are you aware of what's coming up for you? Like, are you noticing when you're in these moments of pain? In Common Humanity, it's recognizing that when you're in this moment of pain, it's actually a moment of connection with others. It's not actually a moment of disconnection. Again, go check out this video where I'll go into a little bit more depth. So practicing self-compassion through this process is acknowledging that when you get it wrong, can you lean into some self-compassion? Because even if you do everything right, other people might not like what you're doing, because again, you're learning how to prioritize your needs, how to stop being too nice per se, and other people who maybe got used to that might feel a little bit uncomfortable with it. They might not like it, and so they might push back a little bit. That's okay. And so you kind of being really prepared to practice some self-compassion in those moments, instead of just backpedaling just because, it got really hard. And so if you can be prepared with this skill, it will be really helpful. Here's another video where I'll actually guide you through self-compassionate breaks. So this is actually one way you can start incorporating self-compassion in your life, these self-compassionate breaks when you recognize that you're in a moment of pain and that you really just need to drop into some self-compassion. Let me know in the comments below, how are you going to start practicing some self-compassion in your life? And for more mental health related content, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel now, where you'll be up to date on anxiety, people-pleasing, perfectionism, and other mental health related challenges. And as always, I encourage you to continue nurturing your mind, body, and soul. Thanks, guys.